I told the gang at dinner that I wasn't nervous at all to do this, but it is packed in here. I also told Jeffrey at dinner that I had this idea to introduce him, that I had this idea to treat the introduction as like a best man speech at a wedding. So we've known each other for 40 years and decided that it was a bad idea, but I'm looking at this right now, what I did right, and it's kind of your boring standard intro. So maybe I'll just tell you what you need to know about Jeffrey. Jeffrey, as has been mentioned, comes to us from Grimsby. He's the author of 5 collections. He runs a wonderful blog called Jeweler's Eye, which is www.jewelerseye.ca, which reviews. The idea of this blog is really unique in review culture in Canada because he reviews single poems, not entire collections, which is just a wonderful idea to take the time to hone in on one poem. And the form that these reviews take is really wonderful as well. Instead of just your run-of-the-mill text review, it's like generally a 20-minute audio-visual kind of presentation, which is wonderful for lizard brains such as my own. It's nice to have a visual accompaniment. Anyways, it's a wonderful blog. Highly recommend checking it out. His latest book is called Slack Action, and maybe are you guys familiar with the compliment sandwich? The compliment followed by an area that means similar, followed by another compliment. Don't worry. So the top layer of bread would be that, actually I will read one thing from my piece of paper here. Right, so Arc Poetry magazine said that, quote, Donaldson excels at presenting complex thought and states of being in an engaging and playful way. His obvious delight in the magic of language shines through in every poem. The middle of the compliment sandwich. Jeffrey, he uses the word mercurial. Now that I think about it, I wonder if it's twice in the book. Is it at least once? And it belongs to that special gang of words that are among my least favorite in the English language that include brewery and rural. The words that, yeah, right? It's like your mouth and your brain are drunk in a vat of molasses or something, trying to swim their way out. But I forgive him for that. And the bottom layer of the compliment sandwich would be kind of my own elaboration on what Arc said about his book, which, as far as I'm concerned, they kind of nailed it with their assessment of Jeffrey's newest collection, Slack Action. The one quality that jumped out to me when I read the book was how playful the poems were. And there's this thing that Nietzsche said that, I mean, I can't remember exactly how it goes, but something about the mark of maturity is when a person has regained the seriousness of a child at play. Something like that. If there's any Nietzsche aficionados out there that want to correct me. I tend to agree with that. I think that great poems kind of report live from the sandbox in that way, because the building blocks of poetry invite to serious play. Anyways, we're delighted to have him with us here tonight. Please welcome Jeffery Donaldson.
Andy, you thought I was that Jeffrey Donaldson. It sounds like a really interesting fellow. I just came off the street, but I can read a little bit and see what happens. Sincere thanks to all the folks at Poetry London and the London Public Library and the Canada Council for the chance to read. London's becoming quickly my second home. It's my first chance, I think, to read here in town. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Yeah, I was thinking about Jeweler's Eye and these video blogs that I give readings of single poems. And the more I do them, and the more I find myself needing to articulate what I think poetry is or what poems are, the more I feel I don't know. I just don't know what poems are anymore. It's like the word that you say over and over again so often to yourself that it sort of disappears into, it somehow loses its meaning. I think of poems more and more as, it's because we have language all around us, everywhere. It's language, language, language. And then somebody stops and then starts using the language in a slightly, in a different way. And that different use quietens the room down, right? And becomes a different moment. And then we stop and then we have more language and language and languages. Readings of poetry and poetry itself are just very different that way. I've often wondered whether if you were sitting in a restaurant and you saw two tables at a distance and 4 people at each table, and one of them, they were just having a conversation, chatting about the day, and at the other table somebody was saying a poem, but you couldn't hear either of them. Would you be able to tell which was which just by looking at them? And I think so. There'd be something about what was going on at the one table where language was being used in a certain way that would be conspicuous, that would present itself. I'd often thought it would be fun to try and write a poem that was about readings. I'm always sort of half ashamed to think that people would kind of come out in these numbers to hear these poems. And I thought I need to write a poem about what it's like to go to a reading to start off with, and it would be hilarious. All I ever came up with was this piece, and it's just a series of metaphors on what it's like to be you, sitting where you are. And it's called More Than 13 Ways of Looking at a Listener. Listeners at a reading are like waves rolling to shore. They stop in front of it. Listeners at a reading are like the echoes of a bucket in the depths of a well. Listeners at a reading are like a person who mistakes a shelter for a bus stop where you wait for buses. Listeners at a reading are like a dog sitting by its master. The master is talking to someone. The dog stares into the fire. Listeners at a reading are like frisky retrievers. They run to fetch what you throw. They sometimes give up and lie down. Listeners at a reading are mirrors in the morning you try not to look into. Listeners at a reading are bums in seats. Listeners at a reading are like the winter bough on which a bird sits and sings. Listeners at a reading are like the soup ladle beside the pot of soup. Listeners at a reading are like a chair found in the middle of the woods. You're wondering how long this goes on, right? It's about 7 more. Listeners at a reading are like the forest a tree falls in when there is someone there. Listeners at a reading are like the poet's worst nightmare, still there after he sits bolt upright. Listeners at a reading are like girls at a wedding. The poet throws her bouquet. The poem is a communion wafer. Listeners at a reading open their mouths. Listeners at a reading are like a day in late September, the Bruce Trail on the escarpment near Grimsby after the leaves have begun turning and the air has a sour nip because it rained that morning, and the colors are deeper and richer than on the dry days. And I can see the lake out through the trees below me with its heavy blue all the way out. And I keep still for a moment. And there is nothing like a wind, and you can hear a leaf drop, and there isn't a sound. And without a sound, I cannot tell, without looking, whether I am the listener at a reading or it is. Poets who take their watches off and they put them on the podium like they're going to be totally in control of how much time they've been. Whenever I do that, I don't take note of what time I put the watch down, and then I never look at it, even if I do take note of it. But you see me gesture, and I do see what time it is, so I'll keep an eye on it. I meant, and I also meant in my original thanks to thank Julie Brooke for this opportunity to read with you. You'll see her exquisite and precise and her luminous language textures and how grandly they're going to overshadow these ones. So you've got a big treat coming up. I'm a big admirer of the poet Pierre Bonnard, and the thing that he's an extraordinary French artist in the sort of middle 20th century period, but I always loved how he lived inside his art, and there were just lots of photographs, great old middle century photographs from rural France of his little rickety house that he had, and he's just up every morning painting. He's just painting all the time. He just seemed to live inside the imaginative vision that he was trying to reproduce somehow in these canvases. And this first poem is going to describe this, but he'd have like 7 or 8 of them, a big tall ceiling, 7 or 8 of them kind of pinned to the ceiling, and he would add to them. He wouldn't finish one painting and then go to the next. He would have certain color, and then he would add it wherever he needed to in the 6 paintings that he had going. And I was like, that's how it's fun to write poems that way, though they tend not to. I think I'll add another word to this poem and then another word to the other one that I have going, but it tends not to work that way. So this is just called Tout en Bonnard. His studio wall in Le Canet, 8 feet of Mediterranean light, paintings tacked all over on it, wherever he could fit them, like notes on a corkboard, a ladder for the higher ones. Some yellow going, he would spot it, here on a storm cloud's underquilt, there for the teacups, glinting node, 3 pictures over, a gold brilliance on the baignoire's blue-tiled floor, the eyes of a cat in a garden. A general becoming, gradual bricolage, everything merging into its own with everything else. I wish I could write like that. 3 flicks in the water glass, and his brush was clean. 2. My daybook is filled with appointments I'm bound to forget. Not his. Each numbered square filled with quick sketches of things he had seen. A goat's head, a tree, someone reading at a table, a woman, 2 boats at anchor, a lighthouse, and jotted above them a word about the weather, beau, nuageux, nothing about deadlines or somewhere he had to be, just the space of the day filled with pictures of what goes inside it. Can you indulge me a sudden impulse just to read a poem that I don't have written down here at all? That I think I'd like to try. It's the first poem in the book, and it's about something that actually happened when I was in Banff at the writers' retreat there, in that old building where the elevators sometimes work and sometimes don't. It's just called Lift. Here's a nightmare you may recognize. An elevator summoned opens wide. You find it empty, welcoming enough. Muzak and lambent lights. You step inside and press its buttons, trusting a machine to find your proper level. In a mood of measured poise, you bide your time, slightly embarrassed by the solitude. But stop! There's no surprising bump, no warning by alarm, save that the doors, somehow having ideas of their own, have opened between two floors. Why so frightened? Cables, backup brake, will keep you pendant, safe from the abyss. But you bang at buttons and you pinch yourself. You've never yet felt paralyzed like this. A host of last illusions falls away. You see the flapping cables on the wall. You see cement unpainted, pipes and clamps. You see the switchbox and electrical. The side rail wheels extending from your car. A ladder even for the climbing free, illuminated as they never are by your being where you shouldn't be. You've done it now, you think, and close your eyes and dream of empty space above, below, those inner soundings, silent and unseen. You're chilled to think that they were always so, and rode along to keep them out of mind. The devil's perch of walled-in promontories gives views of nothing you can recognize when doors don't open on familiar stories. You lurch awake and shudder, gaze about. Your room is a warm, illuminated box with windows on all sides and distant views. The sunlight in the fields, the meadow walks drift placidly away from where you look down at them from above in broken tears. A sense of lift lowering through the downs to stop as on a landing, like a stairs. In all of my books, I've always been obsessed, I think, with time, this great soup that we swim in and fight with and celebrate. Almost as much as poems. I don't know what it is. I have no idea what it is. So I usually try and puzzle out one or another aspect of it in a poem in each of the books. And this one's called November 5th. I went out into the street to meet the people there. It was November 8th. I said to them, "But what has happened to November 5th?" "We did that one," they said. And I asked, "What, all of you?" And they said, "Yes." I scratched my head. "Do you mean to say that this is not happening on November 5th? "Nope," they said. "That's how it works. Things happen on the days that were named for them." And I said, "How's that?" And they said, "Well, what did you think?" And I asked, "But what if there were things on November 5th that haven't happened yet? How would they happen now?" They laughed and said it would be a little late for that, wouldn't it? I said, "How can you live like that?" And they said, "Water under the bridge, my friend." And I wanted to say that that was a cop-out, but asked instead, "And today?" They said, "Today is November 8th. Today we do things..." "I think I get it," I said. They said, "Look, we can see this is hard for you. Come back tomorrow and we'll talk about it some more." I said I would try to be here. I had the sense of looking through that horrible experience. I'm trying to find the poems that they think will stand up to a reading before they read, and everything just sours in front of you, and you despair of finding something. But as I was reading through the book this time, I had this sense of a preoccupation of mine. It never really come clear to me in this way, some kind of this is going to be too fancy a word for it, but secular apocalypse. That is some idea of an apocalyptic event, but that is entirely ordinary at the same time. And what would those be like? And I found myself going back to that idea. Strange moments that are out of time and yet just a part of the everyday as well. This piece is called The Stadium. In the stadium were all those from town who had died. The great reunion had come at last. It was evening and the stadium lights brightened slowly under the dusk that was peaceful and cool. The flags were raised on the light standards along the boulevards, and the libraries and banks were closed. There was a light breeze in the park. The townspeople from every quarter pressed onto the bleachers, looking out among the absent ones below them. The much missed and forgotten, the far too young, those who were lost by accident and those who took leave by their own act, and the long-suffering elderly who at the end dreamed they were falling asleep, and those who died under an angry hand. Many in the bleachers cried out to single ones by name, gesticulating wildly, though for all that their loved ones failed to notice, and more often than not simply looked the wrong way. Besides, there were so many calling. The dead held hands and huddled together and watched with a blinking innocence as of children woken in small hours to witness an eclipse of the moon. When it was almost dark, a bell rang in the tower, and all heads turned alike to the poet, who came slowly from the bleachers and stepped up to the podium, unfolded a single paper and paused, and read aloud a poem he had written especially for the occasion, though it was hard to hear, as many later commented, over the general hum that persisted the whole time. The poet held the paper down in the breeze. Then the ceremony ended, and there was a word of thanks, and the people began to leave, some eagerly, some looking back, but all filing quietly into the boulevards of the town, where the name above the diner flickered on again, and where, had you looked from above, you would have seen homes light up one by one along the avenues the way stars come out at dusk. The poet was gone. The poem he had read was about a toy he had lost when he was a child. The dead stood and looked about in the stadium that had been built around them. Something lighter? I've never read this piece before, scarcely to myself actually, because it's a bit of a tongue twister. It's called a Tourette's 12-tone sonnet. I have Tourette's, fairly easily controlled Tourette's, but Tourette's is a condition of various tics, and mine has been largely concentrated around verbal tics, and that turns out, if you're working in the language field, to be something of an advantage, just to have lots of verbal noise in your head constantly. And particularly when I'm feeling tenser, more anxious, heading towards class, to teach a class, I'll just get this impulse to make up the oddest combinations of letters, and it feels so, I feel so intensely driven to it. And they have to be of a certain sort. The relationships between the letters have to be of a certain sort. And I'll never know if I've quite got it right until I hear it. And so I thought I would try and reproduce that in a poem, and I would come up with these odd sounds, or these odd words and combinations. The gripping windlass foundling answered quib, right? And I say, oh no, that's not it, right? And I would know immediately that's not the combination. And then at some point it would click right, and I managed to get 12 of them down, and so this is what it sounds like. And if you can't follow the narrative, don't worry too much. And a 12-tone sonnet, of course, is, Schoenberg's sense of serial music, where it's not following a harmonic, the same kind of harmonic scale that we're used to following. So the idea is that this is what a poem, as a 12-tone sonnet, would sound like. The glib angles soffit gables true, chafe saddleback, the aster's alms, the woodlock's whistle and jib, when the fickle mastiff ails. Judge Gumdrop is armless. 4 thrums jangle a thyroid. Cankers white over sibilance. Murphy grit, Oslo's napper. Fetid umbrage gambles sturgeon. The cinder's affable mug is meddling, sorry, it's a full sentence. The cinder's affable mug is meddling by plaster bristles. Sedge for mixing Ollie's jester. Hobbledimp, plums, icky gnat. Tongue luck. Amanda Jernigan, an extraordinary poet, was helping me with the editing of this volume when she saw this one in the manuscript. She says, "Okay, do you want to explain this to me?" We'll see whether we can use it or not in the manuscript. And I have the feeling that it's one of those poems that sort of works if you attach the story to it, but otherwise you'd be just mystified. It's probably part of the point. My family's here. My father and sister and cousins. So glad that they could make it. The early part of the manuscript has a series of poems about that sort of enlarge on sort of family experiences. My father worked for 40 years or so on the railroad and gave me the term. I'm not going to read the longer poem, the title poem of the book, Slack Action, but he was the one who gave me the title, Slack Action, for this book, which is a railroad term about how boxcars shuffle together, spread and collapse together as an engine accelerates and decelerates. And this as a metaphor for how lines of poetry can work with their shuffling rhythmic effects. That's all I'm going to say, and then you would have to get the book to figure out how it is that I tell the story about my dad giving me that title. But I'm going to read a poem that's in memory of my mother, who died coming on 3 years ago this month of Alzheimer's. And when I was the poem tells a story, but I'll just give you a quick version of it. I made a clay hand. I was a mama's boy, made a clay hand in kindergarten, just an impression in a bit of clay, and gave it to her and my father, and then forgot about it for years later. And I love thinking about it later, just the idea of that hand being, the thing that continues to reach out for your parents as you age, and that the parents can have as the thing that's reaching up to them as you leave home. But when my mother died, I put the hand under her hand in the basket. And so this is the poem it's about. Hand. A 4-inch plate of fossil clay fired by kiln. My handprint made when I was 5, an ashen gray glazed at 800 centigrade. Around the edges painted red, a green lace threaded through a hole brought back around, a finger knot, as though I'd something to recall. Kindergarten's first day come, you must have had my hand in yours the whole way through, for I still feel the coat rack's here, let go the doors. Now don't be silly, Jeff, be brave. I'll be right back before you know. Miss Nelson here will take you in, the moment when you let it go. I see the countertop, damp clay. My fingers closed together firm. I pressed down hard and made for you a desperate, hopeless, keeping charm. Now years go by. The hand turns up. A disembodied, severed palm inside your white ash jewelry box, fingering paper clips and balm. As though an offering in kind that grasped a boy's tenacious will, attached to no one now around, meant something to you still. Lie down now in this wooden box. You'll not be back before I know. And I will give you back this hand for you to hold. Your fingers so pressed down together firm on mine the whole way through. We can't begin to say the flowers here, the cards, how loved, and I will take you in. And once the kiln is fired, we'll go and make of clay on clay one flesh of keepsakes and assorted gifts inside a jewelry box of ash. I was told by one very modest, not to say that this poem is dedicated to my dear Karen, so I'm not telling you that. It's called Leper Bell. I keep trying to come at this from a different angle, but each time the clapper that chimes distantly and with each step grows more audible is all you can listen for, like the word at the end of a poem, almost out of hearing, the hard thing to say's tintinnabulum. If I were closer to you than I am, and if you could hear me over the sound of the bell, I would want to say something, for instance, about your skin and how I feel about it, its color to begin with, and a word about its lithesome nap. And as I came nearer and spoke, I would have you hear only a more promising bell's familiar accompaniment, a clay bones baited scuttle above your door, or the four-note bubble of wood chimes on the porch where we would sit, or from across town, the giddy carillons cajoling, try as you may, at the wedding chapel. Not this single bell, sole metaphor that hangs around the neck of a love poem that has something that it needs to tell you, the old heartfelt jingle still far away. I think that's the kind of poem you end up writing when you feel undeserving of the love and affection that you receive. Okay, I'm going to finish with one of my toy poems. There's a series of 6 or 7 poems that just play on usually older, sort of 19th century classical toys, and I'm usually trying to find something in the action of the toy to describe something that poems themselves do. And I think there's something of that going on here, but I discovered as I was writing the poem that this is a poem actually more about faith than it is about how poems themselves work. It's called Yo-Yo. This should be easy to handle. Descent and ascent, down and up, fall and rise, resurrection motif, harrowing of hell, and all the potential of catastrophe. Writing about it is like taking candy from a child. The premise is ready-made. It goes like this. Make the simplest of gestures with your hand, as though you were explaining something, as though you were saying, take this, if you like, and casually opened your fingers. The palmed trifle long held to would spill from them. How some smart spinners get the hang of it amazes me, certain that every tossed off letdown backs up on itself into fallout, followed through, its inverse ineluctable. The redemption, the homecoming, the unraveled of its own raveling again, nothing lost. It's the whole comeliness of the afterlife. Spin off into the abyss and use your free fall for bounce back. Find yourself once more at hand, ready to go again. A flourish, a snap, one of the best yarns we have. They make it seem so easy and intuitive. They say all you need is the right touch and a little faith that it will all come about. but my own efforts are no good omen. I get defensive. To let go at the wrong time, I say, to fritter away or bungle the fling, or lose heart at my own half taken back, take this if you like. Sure, may be my own undoing, but I'm a good sport. If anyone can do better, I wager there's a trick to it. Thanks very much.
The first time I encountered Julie's work was in her third and most recent collection, Monkey Ranch, for which she won the Governor General's Award. And when I opened this book and started to read, I suddenly felt as if I hadn't picked up the book at all. I felt like I had picked up the telephone and it was Julie calling me to chat. She was telling me about her family, about her trips to the mall and the zoo, about watching TV, and about all these startling observations she'd made along the way. Now, I don't know Julie, so it'd be rather odd to get a telephone call from her, but that is how her poems work. They speak to me directly and intimately. They are somehow familiar, and yet they show you the shocking, the intensely strange, and the beautiful that can go unnoticed if no one stops to register them. Julie registers them. Reading her work actually reminds me of being in the grocery store and filling my grocery cart full of groceries, only to look down and see that a handgun and a few grenades have slipped in there. It is also familiar, yet terribly strange. I went to see an exhibition of work by the East Coast painter Mary Pratt this past week in Kleinburg at the McMichael Gallery. And it was mentioned in the show that Pratt was often inspired to paint scenes of ordinary domestic life, when a certain light infused them with something special, made them extraordinary. And I think Julie does that too. She waits for just that light. She captures the scene when the view is just right. I once read in an interview that Julie did with the Walrus that due to various factors in her life, such as being born to American parents in Montreal, living as an Anglophone in Quebec, and now living as a Canadian in America, that she's always felt positioned as an outsider looking in on society. And I think that when reading her work, this comes across with wondrous and often hilarious effect. Her poems can make me laugh out loud. She is the recipient of numerous awards and nominations. Her second collection, The Woman Downstairs, was co-winner of the A.M. Klein Award for Poetry. And as I mentioned before, Monkey Ranch won her the Governor General's Award. She has also twice been nominated for the Pushcart Prize. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce Julie.
Must be some other Julie Bruck. Thank you so much. That was lovely. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Poetry London. Thank you to the library. Thank you to everybody. It's been a lovely, warm arrival. I'm going to pour some water. I'm going to read mostly from Monkey Ranch and mix it up a little bit with some newer work as well. I read a Western this afternoon, and it occurred to me at the end of the reading that I hadn't read any monkey poems in the entire reading, so I thought tonight I'd start with the monkey poem. This morning, after an execution in San Quentin, my husband said he felt human again after days of stomach flu, made himself French toast, then lay down again to be sure. I took our daughter to the zoo, where she stood on small flowered legs, transfixed by the drone of the howler monkey, a sound more wretch than howl. Singing monkey, my girl says. She is well rested. We all are. As we slept, cold spring air arrived, blown from the bay where San Quentin casts its sharp light. Tonight, my girl will tell her father, a man restored, even grateful for a day, about what she saw in the raised cage. Monkey singing, she will tell him, and later tell every corner of her cool, dark room, until the crib springs ease because she's run out of joy and fallen asleep on her knees. So I felt somewhat honored to get a wallop of the last winter weather in Montreal last weekend. I felt like, I was getting my Canadian by proxy experience, or at least, a little iota of it. And this is definitely a winter poem, Montreal winter. The Trick. Blinking in the half-light, almost bright after the school's dim corridors, we passed the line of poplars, tall black sentries at the outer limits of the playfield. Streetlights flicked on, one at a time, new snow coming down heavy and wet. We ran the hill and slid, our boots etching serpentines on the snowy sidewalk. A big boulevard to cross, then the empty lot whose Scotch pines knelt beneath the snow's accumulation, blue in this light, before the final dangerous curve. We always sensed them, but were never prepared for the 3 or 4 boys crouched between the blind flanks of houses, coiled to grab our hats and run with impossible suddenness, school bags slung like ammo belts across their 8-year-old chests. We jammed the hats our mothers bought deep in our pockets like charms, anything to deflect their rough attentions, though I knew it meant they liked us. I had 2 brothers and understood to love meant to torment. A schoolmate's mother who sang in a barbershop quartet had already hung herself at home. Another child's father would soon seal his garage door with duct tape and start the family car. She left no note. His would say he loved them all. I thought the trick was to sidestep even the smallest emergencies, disappear in our blue or gray duffel coats, hats clamped in our wet fists, to will them by like fire engines when the fire is elsewhere and much more urgent, until they'd blown past, their boisterous voices receding, their 3 or 4 Canadiens jackets drawing so close to the vanishing point you could hide them by holding up a thumb. We walk home quietly in the softly falling snow, small monks who remained, to all appearances, untouched. So you might get a telephone call from me, but you would never get through to me if you called. And this poem will be by way of explanation. It's not because I don't like you either. Why I don't pick up the phone. Because it's the school nurse saying one child has written on another child, and the ink washed off, but the writing remains. We can't read it, but you'd better get down here right now and do something. Because someone is in a locked ward for their own protection, meaning someone else had to commit them, and now walks around with a heart like a hammered anvil. Or another has fallen, and even though you're next of kin, you're too far away to catch or comfort. I do not lift the headset, sift instead what's coming as the tide sorts its affairs. What washes up should bear signs of who it carries, like an eyelash stuck to the edge of a stamp. And no, smartass, I don't mean caller ID. If I can't have the living glance of the guy from Western Union when he hands over the onion skin, just give me 2 minutes more at the window. Kids from the daycare returning to their ark, clinging to their red rope like little shipwreck survivors, before I pick up and let the world name names. So the world does have a tendency to name names. A school night in February. In his attic bedroom, a teenage boy watches his lava lamp's colors implode. Downstairs, his mother has burned her wrist on the oven rack. She's tired, distracted by an earlier incident to which we are not privy, as she is not privy to the basement location behind the furnace under a tarp, where her son has stored the rifle he will carry to school by a torn hockey bag and lift with a steady hand, a witness will say, from under his grandfather's old black coat, sleet still clinging to the shoulders. Tomorrow night, all night, in tidy, heavily mortgaged homes like this one, lamps will cast angled windows on the worn suburban snow 60 miles west of Chicago. Seen from a distance, say a moving train, it will appear that every other house has left lights on for a weary traveler. Someone expected much earlier, someone who must have been inexplicably delayed. Okay, let's something a little lighter.
Yeah.
As a parent of a teenager, I really look forward to coming back to Canada because I can renew my endless adolescence, which I'm not allowed to renew at home. Yeah, so note the past tense in this poem and you can come to your own conclusions. It's funny that you come back to Canada and behave badly. This doesn't make sense. Smoke. It never took much to start the prowl. A few quarters in my pocketed fist, scanning for blue-haloed strangers gathered under the overhangs. Such awkward transactions. Some resisted the money. "Oh no," said that awfully cheerful woman outside her AA meeting. "Pay it forward." Which I think about as her camel hit my bloodstream, and I'd stagger a little past the Korean barbecue, the tattoo parlor, walking to work in flames. Sometimes I tried to push money on the generous, insisted they need it for a parking meter, or, did I really say this, a payphone. Once outside Humanities, a student from Beijing waved my coins aside, proudly offered his Chinese cigarettes. I took one from his golden pack with a great wall on it and thanked him for his kindness. Crossed the verdant campus, inhaling until the cement bunker of the Harney Science Building became the Imperial Hall of the late Qin Dynasty. And I was walking to work with all the other terracotta soldiers